Greetings and salutations. I figured I'd do a video that would not only dig a little bit into my overfilled mailbag, but also kind of talk about one of the points that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time about social media influencer types in the hobby. The question that had come up was posted by a viewer who asked where they could find somebody like me that reflected the kind of philosophy that I have with gaming. And I'm going to answer that by, not dragging it out longer than I have to. You can't. And I say that not because of any kind of hubris, but because I can only run the game as I know how to. Just as you can only run the game as you know how to. Now, if you are referring to somebody who tries to be as close to raw as possible, they are certainly out there. You just have to know where to look and kind of put yourself out there. I understand that not everybody plays, and it's really hard to find people within your personal life that plays. And so finding strangers is a little bit of an intimidating kind of prospect. But I promise you that if you merely look and put yourself out there, you can find somebody who's willing to play these games as reflective to raw as possible and for game balance and fairness in the dealing with the different party members. Now, moving on to my next point about the social media influencer types in the hobby. They are primarily why I think people have such a thirst for the kind of philosophy that I attempt to reflect in my videos and in my musings and ramblings that you will find on my channel. I want to preface this by saying that I acknowledge that every hobby, be it music, art, movies, whatever, has a particular kind of fandom and a really devoted following to the point where whenever they seem to hit mainstream, it can either be to the benefit or the detriment of said hobby, oftentimes both. And in my opinion, with Dungeons and Dragons, and in particular in TRPGs in general, that currently modern day, it is somewhat of a mixed bag. Having more players and more people willing to try the game is certainly a good thing, in my opinion. I don't think it's bad that so many people want to play. However, most people seem to flock to videos made by people such as Jenny D, who really haven't been in the hobby very long and really who only exist in the hobby because they had a following from somewhere else. In Jenny D's case, she was a cosplayer. And the reason I picked Jenny D for this particular example is because, number one, I'm punching up. She has much more followers than I do. And number two, I just think her videos are just absolute trash. They certainly have better production values than my non-existent production values. However, she reflects something about the current modern state of the hobby that I really highly dislike, and that is so many people who, rather than taking the game from its wargaming roots and accepting it for what it is and having emergent storytelling coming back from gameplay, rather turn towards what I would consider the dark side in creating a short story to make that the focus of the campaign. Those of you that have followed me know my opinions on such things. Story arcs work good for short burst adventures. They do not work for campaigns. And really, when you make a story a campaign, you've kind of lost meaning not only in the campaign, but in the very term campaign. Dungeons and Dragons was born out of wargaming. And that's why you have so much wilderness encounters. That's why you have so much hex crawling. Honestly, you could even argue that that's why you even have dungeon crawling to begin with. Going from point A to point B within movement limitations and discovering what is in the space that you are now currently occupying. Now, some people dislike this and think it's too board gamey. That's a fair criticism. However, I would counter that by saying that the current modern day iteration is, if the older editions are like board games, well, then the current editions are more like choose your own adventure stories in which the rules really don't matter and verisimilitude suffers, and there is no cohesion to the world. After all, when you have halflings and elves, dwarves and humans living alongside such exotic races as Aarakocras or Goliaths, well, that's a little bit of a stretch, and in my opinion breaks immersion. And speaking of immersion, the current modern day social media influencer type that usually gets into this hobby will bring along with them some tropes that are rather annoying to have to deal with, not only as a referee but also as a player. The meta humor that comes with it. For example, many people enjoy the latest D&D movie, Honor Among Thieves, and they are entitled to their opinion and their tastes. However, the movie itself kind of reflects something that I have a problem with in the hobby. Now, the movie itself I actually do like, but if we are to take it as an actual D&D movie, like to represent the game itself, well, now we have an issue with the fact that we have this meta humor of self-awareness coming in, and many people will bring that to the table. Now, I don't have that necessarily coming into my tables, but when you set expectations like that to the masses at large, they tend to kind of believe that this behavior is not only tolerated, but encouraged. And if that's the feel of your game, that's one thing. You should definitely make that known if that kind of humor or attitude is welcome in your game. However, I'm trying to run an escapist form of immersive gameplay. I do not want meta humor at my table. It's one thing to crack a silly little joke at the table once or twice. It's no big deal. I have said a combination of very unfortunate words together in the same phrase to where, yeah, you kind of giggle like a middle school boy. But when we sit down at a table, we want to forget the world and leave everything outside, whether that's politics, religion, philosophy, whatever. We just want to play a game, and that's the way a D&D game should be. And I understand that there's humor in a campaign taking itself too seriously. I understand that. That comes back to maintaining a sort of balance. You must not always take yourself too seriously, otherwise you do come off as kind of a clown. But you must also make sure that you maintain some form of seriousness, because most people, when they sit down to play a game, they're not looking to crack jokes. They don't want it to be like a Monty Python skit. They want the game to be more like a combination of a fantasy book and a Pulp Fiction story. And of course, I bring this kind of thing up because the social media influencer type is really the reason why I think we have so much bad GM advice out there, not only in YouTube, but also in blogs and vlogs that exist on the internet. They are the kind of people that I refer to many times in my videos in the past, that when you tell somebody that you're not Tolkien or Martin, don't write a novel, but then turn around 2 minutes later and tell somebody advice that comes from a grade 9 literature class, there seems to be kind of a dissonance going on within your thinking. I'm not quite totally sure what causes this disconnect, but it is a disconnect. It seems very hypocritical. Now, I've had somebody try to attempt to correct me, but I still maintain that saying these two things is a direct contradiction, because the same kind of advice is meant to be taken in the effect of everything has to make narrative sense. Nothing has to make narrative sense within your game. You must maintain a level of verisimilitude, and that's what the rules are there for, to help maintain that. But by and large, your game will have emergent storytelling without any kind of planning. And because of this, you will have many things come up in play that don't necessarily make narrative sense, but you can improvise. But I'm running short on time now, and I'd like to keep this video in a very manageable time distance. So, as always, guys, take care. God bless. I'll see you on the other side. Thanks for all the subscriptions. Thank you for all the likes. Thank you for all the interactions. I hope wherever this video finds you that you are indeed blessed, and I do hope that you find value in it. Thank you, fellers.